Okay, hi everyone. How are you? Thanks for coming. Just a nice turnaround. Today's class, we will do uh, too many students in a classroom, and we are going to start a whole new chapter, which basically deals with uh, the origin of life. So we're getting back to the evolution once again, and probably with this chapter we never mention again in officially in the classroom about the evolution. So once and for all, we are going to nail down all those concepts and some little bit of the details about the evolutionary concept. And then next chapter after this, we are going to move on to the cell structure. That's how all these the schedules has been organized. So uh, first, as I mentioned, this is about the origin, how, about when and how the first form of life began on Earth. Of course, no one was there uh, in the beginning, so it's always like a total speculation, imagination and speculation. And this is the area where the heavy debates has been always going on between the evolutionary biologists basically and those religiously oriented, those creationists, because this is really easy point for them to criticize some of the logical the pitfall, because at least on the surface it's not really easy to make all this theory and an explanation nice enough to make total sense. Okay, so there has been traditionally or historically, so to speak, there has been two different theories, two different versions of explanation for origin of life. The first one is called spontaneous generation theory, and the other one is a biogenesis. So spontaneous, as this spontaneous word uh, suggests, so in under this theory, the life began for like without any intervention, spontaneously on the surface. It seems like so under this spontaneous generation, life can be formed without any previously existing life form. That's the essence of this spontaneous generation. So all of a sudden, nothing was here, and then voila, life began. Is actually what's this spontaneous generation of life. Uh, and biogenesis, obviously, no, that is not possible. Any existing life form must be originated from the pre-existing one. That seems to be more plausible according to our like the level of understanding of life. So let's just try to compare these two. This spontaneous generation was like the earlier form of this theory, and it states living forms are continually generated from non-living matters, and but there is only one condition, which is I don't know, this room, only this room always is just such a lagging. I cannot really stand this. Maybe it's this. I'm sorry. Let me stop for a moment. So this important condition, premise for this spontaneous generation of life is if proper conditions were met. And what it means actually, the understatement of this proper condition is actually what? So divine intervention. So God is behind this. Uh, that's what it is. The spontaneous generation is all about. So it is actually a highly religiously oriented theory. Any existing life forms are all like a creation of God, and that's why anytime, anywhere, everywhere, life can be formed out of nothing. Is what this spontaneous generation states. In reality, of course, um, that was a predominant idea of the Western culture before the development of the modern science. So it is heavily religiously oriented philosophy. And on the other hand, on the contrary, the biogenesis states that life arises only from pre-existing one, obviously. And so uh, the the founder, although there were several predecessors who actually thought about it and then claimed this relatively new idea of biogenesis at the time, but we can generally consider this prominent figure, the Louis Pasteur, as the founder of this the biogenesis theory. Everyone knows who the Louis Pasteur is? No? Oh, shame. What a shame. Louis Pasteur was the really famous microbiologist and the medical doctor, and obviously, basically, really great scientist at the time. So he was like one of the who lived in the 19th century, as you can see over there. That he was the one who demonstrated that indeed, actually, spontaneous generation of life is not true with this famous experiment known as so-called swan neck flask. So, actual photograph, he was working on his laboratory at the time. And actually, he was the first one who invented this vaccination. The vaccine, yeah. French scientist. And thanks to him, now we basically have this benefit of protection against all those infectious disease, particularly the viral disease. And this is, what is this? Probably the replica of the experimental tool he used at the time. This is called, we can call this as a swan neck flask because this neck, long neck, resembles that of the swan. And this is basically the flask, right? But what's special about this flask is this. So if you fill this flask with some of the nutritious broth, really goody, and if you do not do anything, like with leaving this open neck and open on the top, then it's just a matter of time. Then all those microorganisms, bacteria contamination will occur over here, obviously. So at that point, one can argue that the origin of this microorganism over here is the result of spontaneous generation, right? But Louis Pasteur didn't think so. Of course, that shouldn't be the case because of his long time experience in or other dealing with the microorganisms and other life forms. So he knew instinctively, oh no, that is not true. So then the question is, how can he demonstrate the microorganism, the contamination uh, occurring, taking place over here after, for a while, after for some time, was not actually something that originated from over here, but was coming from external source of contamination. If only he can demonstrate that really systematically and scientifically, then he can falsify, hey, you guys, that's whatever it is, that spontaneous generation theory was false. Okay. Then alternative, which is biogenesis, should be correct one. Is his like a strategy in this experiment. That's why this experiment also appeared in on your textbook. Your regular textbook, the description of this swan neck experiment was there somewhere in this chapter 3. So one thing is, after filling this with this nutrient broth, if you heat this area, heat it up, okay, which means sterilizing, you are killing all those any contaminating source, like, and then if you plug in on the opening, then nothing will happen. You know that, right? So that is something that kind of indicating the source of contamination, I mean, source of that the life is not coming over here in the form of a spontaneous generation. The source of a new life form is coming outside, and then you cut off the entry of outside of life form, and also you still killed any potential source of contamination by heating this. But the beauty of over here, this design, mechanical design of this swan neck flask is here underneath at the bottom of this curved shaped neck, you can actually trap any outside contaminant source at the bottom. Trap was kind of beauty of this design. So, so in this swan neck design, what can happen is, obviously, if you leave this door open, unplugging at the top, then outside the contaminant, airborne contaminant source can come in and then can actually touch on this nutrient area, nutrient broth area, and then have this growth. But due to this design of this curved particular design, all this outside source of contamination can be majority, can be trapped at the bottom over here. So with this design, even leaving this, the neck, the opening unplugged, nothing still happened because all those contaminant sources cannot escape on this trapping area. So even long time after this, leaving this flask open for a long period of time, nothing happened on this occasions. So then the only last thing he can do is now, where he is now, at this point, from outside observers. Obviously, this thing you cannot see, right? Nothing. There is no way you can distinguish there is some contaminating bacteria are actually trapped over here. So how can you demonstrate at this point actual real contaminants are trapped over here? How can you? So if you just leave this flask open and then vertically stand upright, no matter how long you just leave this thing open, nothing will grow at the bottom. So the only thing that to make sure that Actually, those contaminants were not able to come into because of this design. So they are all over here. How can you? It's not really that difficult. Simply by this, by simply tilting. If you tilt, then some of the liquid can touch this area and then back to the vertical position. Now, even very short time period, a lot of things are growing. So that is something that you can demonstrate. Oh, all those contaminant sources were actually over here. So it's just a matter of they were not able to move because of this particular design. But if you allow them to make any contact, then they can go into, then have a really, really heavy life form of a lot of growth. This is a big, big time growth over here, even within a very short period of time. So it is a really clear demonstration of that all those growth inside of this type of experiment, anything, everything can only come from outside. So it is not something that any life form is generated spontaneously inside, was his idea. And everyone understood, and then accept with this experiment, accept this the relatively new doctrine of biogenesis. Fine. So ever since then, no one has any problem about this theory of the biogenesis, spontaneous generation is not correct idea. Fine, agree. Okay. Actually, after the invention and development, more fine development of the microscope, people were shocked. Actually, when they had a sampling of some small pond water under the microscope, all different kinds of little things are moving around. So they were shocked. Oh, life forms are everywhere. Okay? But the thing is, all those life forms are coming from pre-existing one is the important thing. But there is a problem. If biogenesis was a really correct idea, that's fine. Everyday routine, what we observe really corroborate, support this idea of biogenesis. It seems so right. But there is one problem. If that was the case, then how did the first life form begin? The very first life form has no existing life form. So how can that be generated? If that was to be correct idea. That is something that really, really paradox of this biogenesis idea. So how can you solve this paradox? So you have to you have to invent another paradox over here in order to make all this biogenesis idea something plausible. So what they have to claim is, oh well, there are two different versions of origin, life origin. The first origin is spontaneous. You have no choice. The first origin must be spontaneous because the first one, there is no forefather to provide any life form. The first life form is a spontaneous, generated, and then ever since, after this first life form, all other life forms are generated through biogenesis. What a convenient idea. So at your convenience, you can actually say one and the other, totally different one, at your own convenience. That is not a science. But if you sit down and think about it, there's no other way to reconcile these two paradoxes. So then we have to come up with. First task is how this spontaneous generation, which seems to be impossible in these days, right? In these days, no life forms can ever seems to be generated through this spontaneous generation. No matter how long you try to observe, and then try to search for it, there is not a single event that you can identify that as a result of a spontaneous generation. Even with that, the first life form must be generated spontaneously. Then at least what you have to do is to provide sound, logical explanation of how and why the the first life form could be generated spontaneously is at least something that you have to do. So this spontaneous generation in the beginning we call as a chemical evolution. And afterwards, once you succeed in this event of chemical evolution, the next step and the following all other steps are called the biological evolution or this biogenesis. So the first spontaneous generation was mediated through so-called that the event of chemical evolution. On the other hand, all other, the next generation ever after, was the result of this actual the biological evolution that we are familiar with, this evolution. And another name for this biological evolution is Darwinian evolution, Darwinism. Darwin is the one who formulated the idea of this evolution. So the point is, the chemical evolution and this biological evolution is totally two different idea. Apple and oranges is the thing. Okay, um, so this chemical evolution, under this chemical evolution theory, the first life form has to be formed from even non-living materials. That is the actually shocking, real, the revolution, actually. It's not even evolution, but it's a revolutionary evolution. So it has to come all these non-living matters, and somehow they organize themselves inside some of the fine territory. We know this is a what? Cell, isn't it? So the first formation of the cell is what it is all about, this chemical evolution. The first form of a cell must be generated from non-living material spontaneously is the thing. So here, unlike some of those religious-oriented people who like to believe that at least this, we don't even have any working marker. Shame. No marker. Great. Nothing? Okay, fine. Sorry. So, this, at least from non-living matter to any life form, can it be done through this divine intervention like creation? But scientists say no, even that one can be done theoretically speaking. Actually, it is possible. Any living thing can be can be formed from nothing like a non-living matter is what this is all about. So, I have shown already this figure people previously. So this is all about from this non-living material, like some of the chemicals, some of the chemical, ammonia, water, and hydrogen gas. So this whole thing is what? If you observe this conversion, the procedure, stepwise conversion, culminating in at least some primitive form of a cell, which is the beginning of the first life form, what can you say about this trend? Starting from over here, you are moving on to the next level and next step until you finally form some like a cell-like structure. What is the overall common trend do you see here? This is chemical, right? And what's the difference between these two groups of chemical over here? This chemical versus this chemical. And what about this? This chemical and now the amino acid, ribose and adenine that we have seen in the previous chapter as a what? Biological macromolecules. But real biological macromolecules are here, but these are the one of the small components from which all these biological macromolecules can be built. And with this biological macromolecule, now finally can you build the cell? Wasn't it the same that why you see the organic macromolecule only inside of a living thing? Because those are the very, very complex. Organic macromolecules are very highly complex, which are needed to build this. So this versus this, they are both the chemicals. But what kind of difference can you say between this, the first step chemical versus this almost final version of this chemical, macromolecules, organic macro. Simple, more complex, isn't it? So this trend is they are moving on to the more complex form in terms of organization. They're moving in. That's it. From simpler one to more complex form of chemicals, molecules. So now here, very simple molecule, a little more complex and relatively highly complex molecule, and extremely huge complex molecules. Now they are the common ingredient of all living cells. This is trend. But this is why this figure is so important. So if this was the trend, which is necessary for building at least the spontaneous generation, or which is the chemical evolution of the first cell, do you see any problem? So this must be done through spontaneous. Do you see any problem here? Big theoretical problem. Now, let's see. From this to this conversion, is it spontaneous? I mean, this has to be done through chemical reaction, right? Everything has to be done through chemical reaction. Now, if you examine the plausibility, whether it can be done spontaneously or not, like I said, there are two different kinds of reaction. In the previous chapter, we have done it. One is a spontaneous reaction, the other one is a non-spontaneous reaction, right? So, in terms of such category or classification, are all these spontaneous reaction or non-spontaneous reaction? Non-spontaneous reaction cannot be done theoretically, cannot be done spontaneously, and we are claiming this conversion was done spontaneously? What on paradox. What a complete idiotic paradox. That's a big problem. See? No, you can't do this. But it is saying that there is absolutely not a chance that the conversion of this simple molecule into a little bit more complex molecule, and then so on and so on, more a little bit more complex molecule. Are we saying that this is absolutely impossible, or in some occasion it is possible, but only a certain specific condition? Which one is it? The latter is this. Yeah, we are not saying that, right, this is, all these are non-spontaneous reaction. Direction-wise, this is non-spontaneous reaction. However, we are not saying that it cannot be done whatsoever. It is not possible. But even for those non-spontaneous reaction, it is possible as long as we provide what? Energy, right? If we provide energy, still it can be done. That's the definition of non-spontaneous reaction. Right. So the problem is, still the problem is, no one is there. Energy, yeah, provision of the energy, either, are there any enzyme? If there is any enzyme, it might be. It could be done. But no enzyme is even there. And no living person is there to mediate this energy provision, then how can we say that energy was somehow provided to make this conversion, which is basically non-spontaneous reaction? That is actually a big problem, and still is unsolved problem. We can think about it, yeah, in some particular occasion, in a very special place somewhere, like by chance, but you cannot show them, hey, this is the thing that actually happened. Well, almost. So this, you may be encountered with some of this criticism about this chemical evolution from those sector of those who supporting this creationism, and this the second law of thermodynamics. The first and the second law of thermodynamics is all about the energies. Although I put some concise explanation in your lecture handout of the chapter 1 about this first law and the second law of thermodynamics, but I did not bother to go over this idea in the lecture, unlike the previous semesters, because I found that every semester most students have a difficulty of understanding this law of physics, unless you are a science major. Yeah, if you're a science major, no problem, because it's a very basic fundamental ideas. But non-science major try to grasp these two ideas. It's not really worthwhile. So that's why I did not bother to go over this thing. Anyway, the second law of thermodynamics states that this about the entropy. The second law of thermodynamics is about the entropy. So at least you know about the anabolic and catabolic reaction. Catabolic reaction is a breaking down from complex to the simple molecule. And anabolic reaction is from the very simple to a more complex one. So that's why all those anabolic reactions are non-spontaneous, whereas the opposite direction, starting from more complex to getting into the smaller one by breaking down, is catabolic reaction, which is energy releasing. This catabolic reaction is energy releasing, and anabolic reactions, this direction is energy requiring to complete. And so going into this catabolic reaction, the reason why this catabolic reaction is spontaneous is because at each at the result of each catabolic reactions, you create more degree of disorder. And this is about the entropy. The in particular condition, which is one of the concepts in physics, entropy, describes the degree of disorderliness. To put it simply, let's say here in this classroom, 50-something students are sitting nicely in very straight rows. They're not moving, really behaving, studying very hard. And the entropy level of this classroom is very low entropy because they are highly ordered. But once the class is dismissed and the breaks, during the break, everybody is moving around and then going out. So like kind of a really disorganized and chaotic. That's what we describe as a higher entropy. So when all those material, including humans, everything, when they move freely around, then we describe that as a high entropy, whereas they are not really moving and highly organized, not very much moving, then the entropy level is low, and that's unnatural. So naturally, the whole this universe favors all those conditions toward more disordered, unorganized state. That's a natural way. Anyone smoke? You're not smoke? You're not smoking cigarette? Or quit? Okay, good. Good that you quit. When you smoke, you pop a cigarette smoke, then this smoke does not stay near you, but it's spread all over. Why? Why does a cigarette smoke spread away from you? That's natural way. That's natural way of spreading. Why any material spread over, diffuses out? Because it by doing so it increases this entropy. Because when the particle of cigarette smoke, when they are within very small narrow volume, and it means it's highly organized, so it is a lower entropy, which is against nature. So naturally, all these cigarette particles, smoke particles, will try to move away to increase their entropy level. That's why all this cigarette smoke and all other particles diffuse instead of gathering. Okay? Another thing is, heat. Heat is another good example of this entropy. Let's say you have a very hot coffee and the iced coffee. On your left, iced coffee. On your right, a very hot coffee. If you mix, by mixing it, is there any way that you can create much hotter coffee in terms of the temperature? No way. You always have this lower, cool down temperature of coffee. So heat, high energy, okay, highly disorganized, the highly organized way, that by diffusing out, you just dissipate, so lowering the average temperature. That's the natural way, and that's why usually if you leave anything hotter, that it will cool down. That's another example of such the entropy, the behavior of these materials according to the law of this entropy. So bottom line is, once again, all those living and non-living matters, materials, will always, in terms of a chemical reaction, they will move toward the result of increasing the entropy. Then that is the spontaneous reaction. And if for some reason any chemical reaction will try to violate such trend of like increasing the entropy, that is non-spontaneous reaction. So here, look, try to get back to this example again. So from the simple molecule, if you try to collect the brick and then build a house, small house, then each individual bricks are all scattered around, and then if you collect them, gather them, and then put a nice, well-organized brick house, are you increasing the entropy or decreasing the entropy? The bricks are all over the place. Then now you are collecting them and then build by putting each one together and building a small house, brick house. So are you increasing or decreasing the entropy of it? Decreasing, because all these bricks are highly disorganized, but now you are making these bricks organized, increasing, the level of orderliness. So by doing so, you are decreasing the entropy. So is it natural or unnatural? This is unnatural, non-spontaneous. That's why it takes energy. You have to provide the energy if you want to. But if you get bored and then try to break them, so that nice, well-organized brick house was broken and each individual component of the bricks are all scattered all around, now you are increasing the entropy. So by doing so, the energy contained in this brick house can be released, and entropy is increased, and it's more natural way of doing things. That's why they are. The opposite way of chemical reaction is spontaneous. So anyway, I don't want to put too much time on this. So the previous example of such spontaneous generation of the first life form, starting from very simple and a little bit more complex, and more complex thing is highly non-spontaneous, okay, which requires the input of energy. And one really striking violation of the law of physics is at each point you are violating this second law of thermodynamics, which is about the entropy. The second law of entropy, the thermodynamics states that the entropy of the universe, entire universe, always gets to be increased, or at least stays the same. That's the rule of the entire universe. Just like kind of the very simple analogy, right now, currently, our universe is still expanding. By expanding universe, you are creating more and more of the disorder, so you are increasing this entropy, right? So how can it be possible? You are not even a God, and how can you violate this law of physics, which is the second law of thermodynamics? So that is a really, really favorite point that all this creationist criticizes the problem of this chemical evolution. So in defense against such criticism, what can you say? Well, you can provide the energy, of course, at this point. If you provide the energy, you can create this non-spontaneous reaction. But that's really very poor excuse because you create this small local area, okay, by putting the energy. But you are, by doing so, you are violating this law of physics, which is a thermodynamics. Clearly, it is impossible. You cannot, because if you do so, you are decreasing the entropy. If you, by providing the energy, if you make certain things more organized, then that event is actually an act of decreasing the entropy. How can it be possible? Think about it. Fine, someone says that if you provide energy, you can make this thing a little more organized. Yeah, it is possible. Practically, yeah, you can do so, right? Every day. That's, you see some of such examples. By working, you're cleaning your room. That is, by providing the energy, you are making your room nicely organized. So you are basically decreasing the entropy of your room. But that's a violation of this thermodynamics, the entropy. Then how can you? It is against the law of physics and law of this whole new universe. You are not. You cannot decrease the entropy. How can you do that? Well, what the scientists say is fine, okay, locally, locally you are making over here entropy. Let's put this E as an entropy. You are decreasing the entropy. In order to do so, you have to provide the energy, right? But where did you get this energy in the first place? That's what this first law of thermodynamics states. The first law of thermodynamics is about the energy conservation. You cannot create any energy, nor can you destroy the energy. Energy is always there. The total amount of whole universe, I mean, total amount of energy in the entire universe always stays the same. So what I mean by that, you get the energy. You take the energy from somebody else. If you get the energy from somebody else, that is what? Is there the catabolic reaction or anabolic reaction? You get the energy. If you want to get the energy, then somebody must release the energy. That act, releasing the energy, is what? Increasing the entropy. So, in order to decrease the small area of local entropy over here, you have to. The only way you can do this is creating this much larger area of entropy, a big entropy boost to get this energy in terms of the entire universe wise. So to make this the overall, the entire universe, actually even bigger, larger increase in the entropy has to occur. So overall balance sheet is still the result, and the result is increased entropy. So nothing has been violated ever. Because this whole, what's the law of thermodynamics is always like with regard to entire universe. And you only now talk about very small local area event. So overall, still the law of thermodynamics, which is about this entropy and the energy conservation, still stays unviolated. Okay, so that's real explanation about how still can it be possible Okay, so this energy input is has to be done on the very special way, on the very specific way, and one such place scientists think that might happen is maybe in the deep sea bottom. We call that as a hydrothermal vent at the bottom of the deep sea, or when some volcanic eruptions together with high energy release with the water. So such area heat with the high energy and instant cooling can occur at the same time at a certain local area. So that might be one such an ideal potential place, but no one can actually provide definite proof about it. It's only once again, it's only the speculation. And forget about this reducing atmosphere. Is I'm not. I don't want to go into that. A little more confusing idea. So let's forget it. So anyway, the first in the first the atmosphere on Earth was actually something that lacking entirely the oxygen. There was no oxygen in the air. Okay? Um, So those atmosphere is called the reducing atmosphere, but just let's forget it. And only this, the first atmosphere on Earth was something that did not contain any oxygen. Was let's just remember only that one. And then, and with what kind of event did we have this oxygen-rich atmosphere in the air? Who made this oxygen rich atmosphere? Who? Yes? Huh? Heat? By heating, you can create oxygen? Not really. There is a particular chemical reaction that generate oxygen as byproduct. Look outside. Those little green, our friends, they can generate oxygen. So let's get into. We are going to get into that later today. So anyway, the first atmosphere was entirely that lacking the oxygen. That's the thing. Okay, so another thing is in making this first cell, this is a cell membrane, isn't it? Cell membrane is very important, very critical towards the generation of the first form of life. However, more important thing is our genetic material, isn't it? As I went over even in the first day of our lecture, this DNA, the genetic material. Why? By having this DNA as genetic material, this the structure we call cell obtain what? The ability to what? Reproduce. By the DNA has a special ability of replicating. So with that, cell can divide. So this cell can keep living. Without the genetic material, any whatever you have this inside, still it is not a permanent existence, but it will only last for certain given period of time. But special feature of this genetic material is it can keep regenerating itself in the form of this DNA replication. So it's self-replicating material. If you remember, still remember that in the previous lecture that this complementary base pairing the importance of this complementary base pairing is the ability of self-replication. So those genetic material. So anything, any macromolecule can potentially serve as the genetic material. However, in order for any macromolecule to be able to function as the genetic material, this so-called self-replicating ability. Self-replicating is the most critical requirement. But not many molecule can provide this function of self-replication, but DNA, as we have seen in the previous lecture, can do this because of this special organization. Anyway, so these days we all know that DNA is the genetic material in our cell. Every cell contains DNA in our nucleus, and the function, the role of this DNA is to serve as our genetic material. DNA is a genetic material. Yeah. No question about it. But someone says that, oh, actually, in the beginning, in the first form of a cell, DNA was not functioning as the genetic material. But what is then? If not DNA, then who can serve as genetic material? Stupid. Then they say, well, it's an RNA rather than DNA. What's RNA? What's RNA? A cousin of DNA. Kind of. I mean, we have seen in the last week's lecture that the chemical difference between DNA and RNA, right? In terms of a chemical, like nucleotide level, DNA, the nucleotide from which DNA is made is slightly different from those nucleotides that gets to generate the RNA. Other than that, what kind of a difference do you know between DNA and RNA? These days, we all know that DNA is the gene, the genetic material. And what's RNA in these days? Single strand, right. DNA usually exists in the double-stranded, but RNA exists as a single strand. And there is a reason why RNA prefers to remain in single strand, but I don't want to go into that. But importantly, the difference between DNA versus RNA in these days is, like, maybe I can say this. If this is DNA, right? And DNA will make RNA. And this particular area, like whole this area being copied into a single RNA, because RNA and DNA are very similar, only slightly different in its chemical nature, then this is the gene. Any gene will make their area copied into RNA. And what's the function of this RNA? Then, according to the information of RNA, eventually, finally, this protein will be made. So, in these days, basically, this relationship, what we can say is DNA is kind of a cookbook. Let's say you have a whole encyclopedia, like a cookbook whole. So in this cookbook, each different recipes for all different dishes are there. So huge cookbook is your DNA in the gene chromosome. So this is huge thing. But each page of this cookbook, each single different page, different dishes. How to make this particular dishes, the instruction. So this DNA is something like an instruction manual for how to make something. So DNA is just information. What's really tangible, actually working, is the protein. Protein is the product that you want to see, just like the actual cooked dishes. They can fulfill your stomach and your appetite. But this whole recipe, the cooking recipe, is nothing but simply the instructions to lead to result in the products. What's in between this instruction versus actual product lies the RNA. What is the RNA? So your cookbook, entire cookbook, is too huge and too valuable because that is only your single copy of your information book. So every time you want to do any particular cooking activity, it is not simply the reasonable and wise idea to bring the entire cookbook to the place of your cooking. That's stupid, crazy. So alternatively, what can you do? You're not even going to make all those tens of thousands different dishes every day. You only, in a given day, particular Monday, you want to cook pizza, and Tuesday you want to make something else, ramen or anything. So, and each different occasion, instead of trying to bring and mess with the entire cookbook, but isn't it wise to pick only particular page you need? And then usually the reasonable activity is try to make a copy, try to make a photocopy, and then bring that photocopy. And then let's say there are many chefs waiting for those instructions, then to hand out each chef that, hey, this is the instruction. This is the actual copies of original instruction. So feel free to read and then do the follow the instruction. That's what it is all about. So basically here, instead of getting into a more detail to make you unhappy, simply the relationship between DNA and RNA is like that. The original instruction of making protein versus the copy of original instruction. So usually to a given area of a certain territory, certain area of this original gene, you get to generate multiple copies of RNA. Just like when you try to photocopy a certain document, usually you want to make several copies of one original document so that you can distribute each copy to everybody else's. And that's usually what this RNA's function in these days. And RNAs usually, because of that, it is simply a copy, so it exists as a single-stranded instead of a protected double-stranded. So that's the current view and role of the RNA and the DNA that we know in these days, modern. But here, this so-called the RNA world hypothesis is totally different in that in the beginning, when the chemical evolution occurred, so that the first form of life was there, the genetic material was not DNA, but RNA was the original genetic material. But for some reason, this RNA originally it was the genetic material, but gave its position to DNA, and then nowadays they are actually playing a second fiddle, like seemingly less important role than, but that's a totally the biased idea about RNA is less important. No, who said that RNA is less important? That is not true, but that's kind of perception, general perception that DNA is more important because it's a genetic material, and RNA is only copies of DNA, so it's unimportant. But fine, let's say that. Even so, RNA was, in the beginning, was the genetic material, was this RNA, all about the RNA world hypothesis. Okay, fine. Then why? Why even RNA? Why did you even think about this, bother to think about this RNA rather than DNA was the genetic material? Is this. Um, the nice version of this relationship between DNA and RNA that I have just explained is this figure. DNA is there, and DNA will generate the RNA. So this is basically a copy of this area of DNA. And this RNA information written, inscribed on the RNA is the one, something that necessary for building protein. Proteins are simply just a collection of individual amino acids, wasn't it? Anyway. So, but the important thing is every different steps, like to make RNA from DNA, you need some enzyme, which is, its name happens to be RNA polymerase. That's not important. Who cares about the name? But the important thing is enzyme. Enzyme catalysis is absolutely required. And also, from RNA to actually building protein according to the instruction of the RNA, you need another kind of enzyme. In this case, the ribosome is the one. And the copying, the replication of DNA, like doubling of DNA also requires another specific enzyme whose name happens to be a DNA polymerase. So the whole bottom line is each different step of such activity requires the enzyme function. Enzymes are what? Enzymes are made of enzymes. We have seen 4 different types of macromolecules: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acid. Among these 4 different enzymes are usually made from what? Carbohydrate, lipids, protein, nucleic acid? Which one? Proteins. Proteins are the one who can generate. Why protein? Sorry. Let's say this protein. This is a protein. Protein can have this. Protein can have this unique shape by folding. No other DNA or carbohydrate, lipid can do this. So this specific shape is something very important, because by forming this specific shape, they can form very specific this relationship between the enzyme and substrate specificity, and that's the kind of the driving force for any chemical reaction, catalysis. So that's why all these enzymes are needed. Enzymes are made of proteins. So Do you see any problem? If DNA was the genetic material, this, if this is something that's happening every day, every minute in our cell, no problem, fine. But let's say this was the first event that happened in the first form of life. Just right after the completion of this chemical evolution, the next thing is this DNA should function to generate this protein. Why do you need protein? Because protein can function in many different ways, like including enzymes and all kind of structural protein and many different things. So you need to make protein. In order to make protein, you have to start from this DNA to RNA in protein. But each step you need enzyme, and enzymes are made of protein. But protein you have in order to this, but you haven't produced any single protein yet. How can you do this? You can't. Impossible. So all this chemical evolution was all, like I said, it was all totally nonsense and hoax. Forget about it. What chemical evolution? It is not possible, right? So, to make ways this thing, once again, scientists had to come up with the new idea of what is something called the RNA world. So instead of DNA, not DNA, but RNA was the first genetic material. What kind of difference can, hey, you look at me. What kind of difference can it make? RNA? What's the difference between DNA and RNA? Why RNA? Because chemical property of RNA is so unique in that actually RNA, sometimes RNA can function both as a genetic material as well as enzyme. Wow, what a convenient material. Why? Because RNA, unlike DNA, which has this kind of restriction of having to be in the double-stranded form always, the being a single-stranded actually gives a lot of this freedom. So RNA can take very flexible different forms. So new shape. It is RNA can form some various shape just like very similar to proteins. So in mid 1980s, actually finally some scientists found the evidence of such RNA that can function also as an enzyme. And then they formulated this name as a ribozyme. It is a combined word of ribonucleic acid, which is RNA, plus enzyme, so ribozyme, which kind of implying that RNA that function as an enzyme. So in other words, ribozymes are deRNAs, but instead of playing the conventional role of RNA as a simple copy of DNA, but the ribozymes are actually acting as an enzyme in the cell. And for the first time in 1985, two scientists from independently, they have discovered the existence of ribozyme in our cells. These two, at the Yale University and the University of Colorado, so Sidney Altman and Thomas Cech, both of them, obviously, of course, must have won the Nobel Prize afterwards, of course, that indicate the significance of their scientific achievement. So, uh, actually, it turned out that many ribozymes are actively functioning in our cells. So, this is not some very rare exceptions, but it is a norm. So, what's going on? So, to summarize, probably it must have been that in the beginning, RNA was the, because it has to be DNA. If the DNA was from the get-go, if DNA was to play as a genetic material, it is impossible, as we have seen already. So at the beginning, in the beginning, RNA was the one. Why? Because RNA, it can intrinsically it can function as genetic material because it can have this complementary base pairing and anything. It can store the genetic information. But on top of that, additionally, by forming some very unique shape, RNA can also function as an enzyme. So in the beginning, it must have been really critical and convenient feature. So now, like it's juggling two jobs at a time. RNA. Okay, at one time I serve as a genetic material, and then at the same time, do I need any enzyme? Of course, I will do that myself. It is theoretically possible. So, but once everything is settled, okay, so by the diligent, busy action of such an RNA, acting both as a genetic material and an enzyme, now you have finally produced enough amount of a protein and everything you need in the cell. So now you have settled down. So you have become more stabilized, let's say. Then you are moving toward more stable form. In the beginning, you need to improvise. In the beginning, you need to improvise, but once you stabilized, you seek to become more efficient. In the beginning, you start with a rough action, but as you progress toward a more stabilized structure, now, in order to stay above with the other competitors, you want to become more efficient. And when it comes to the efficiency in terms of this genetic material, RNA is really not really ideal material because RNA is chemically very unstable. If you leave the RNA on the table, on top of the table for 30 minutes, all those RNA will be degraded, chemically unstable. On the other hand, if you leave the DNA for the same period, nothing will happen. DNA can stay much longer. So DNA is much more stable structure. So it is really ideal to become genetic material. Stability is really big issue for any information, right? So in the beginning, we may really definitely really need the help of this RNA's function. But once you become something like an established structure, now you kick the RNA, okay? And then give this position to the DNA. Is that's what nowadays scientists think what has happened. But still, the legacy remains in that the critical enzyme responsible for building protein on the ribosome is still RNA, the ribozyme, not protein in these days. So that indicates that really the function of this RNA as an enzyme was there and then still remain as one of the such legacies. Okay. There are three different types of different RNAs. We will just take a look at later when we look at the function of the genes. So right now, let's not worry about this. So that's about the chemical evolution. With that, we can have a short break. Instead of a long 25 minutes break, we can have a short break and then finish earlier today, isn't it? Because just between three of us. So let's have a very short break and then continue on the second part of this lecture. Okay?